Sometimes, the greatest beginnings are born from the hardest falls. She once stood on the top floor of the power tower, humiliated in the boardroom, then thrown out into the rain. No money, no title, no faith left to hold on to. Only one sentence remained. "Thank you for freeing me from my fear." From an old basement in Chicago, where light barely filtered through a small window, she and a few souls rejected by the world built an empire of compassion. They called it LKI, but later, people came to know it by another name, the company of those who still believe in humanity. This is not only a story about the love between two people who dared to stand against an empire, but also a journey to rediscover faith, kindness, and the true meaning of power. Because sometimes, the strongest thing isn't the hand that holds power, but the heart that dares to love in the dark. That morning, Chicago was so cold it felt as if the whole city was holding its breath. The wind from Lake Michigan swept past the old buildings, along the cobblestone streets, carrying the scent of snow and metal. Church bells rang, echoing through the silvery sky, reaching all the way to the bare trees at the end of the season. In that sound, Cheryl stepped out of the limousine she had rented with her last savings. Her white silk dress wasn't new, it was borrowed yet in her bright eyes. Nothing about her looked ordinary. St. Mary's Church stood in the heart of the old district, majestic like a stone palace, with high stained glass ceilings glowing in vivid colors. Inside, the orchestra began a soft classical wedding march, but the air was cold, silent, and tense like a string about to snap. On the right pew, where the groom's family sat, the pale faces of the Kappa lineage glowed under the stained light. They didn't smile or nod. They only watched her as if she were a stain creeping into their bloodline. Only a few of Cheryl's friends sat on the left, small, fragile presences adrift in a sea of frost. Cheryl clutched her bouquet of white roses, the petals trembling with the faint shake of her hand. Yet her chin remained high. Each step she took was a wordless challenge. I wasn't born to be accepted. I was born to make them change the way they see. The music played slowly. With each step, the colored light poured over her dress in swirls of violet, red, and blue like moving fire. At the end of the aisle, Lauren Kappa waited for her. He wore a perfectly fitted black suit, his hair neatly combed, eyes glistening with emotion. In that gaze was sorrow, love, and an unspoken apology. "I'm sorry for letting you walk into this cold place alone." When she drew near, Law exhaled softly, as if seeing salvation. He took her hand, his fingers cold, trembling, and held on tight, a silent promise. "You look beautiful," he whispered. Cheryl smiled faintly, her voice soft as wind. "As long as you don't regret it." "Never," he said. And at that moment, she knew everything was worth it. The ceremony followed every proper rite. The priest's prayer echoed as light filtered through the glass, casting a quiet blessing on their faces. But from the right pew, Dawson Kappa Law's father stared like a blade hidden in silk. Each vow felt like a defiance. Cheryl heard the murmurs clearly. "She's just climbing her way up. It won't last. He'll wake up soon." She didn't respond. Law's hand tightened slightly. They exchanged rings. When the pastor asked, "Do you take her to love and cherish, for richer or for poorer, till death do you part?" Law didn't hesitate. "I do." His voice rang through the church, firm and full of feeling. The room went silent. Cheryl looked into his eyes and saw not just love, but a declaration. She answered, "I do." When they kissed, there was an audible gasp, Dawson's. A few guests looked away, yet others teared up, for even if they denied it, they all knew they had just witnessed a small victory, love triumphing over pride. Snow began to fall outside the chapel, soft white flakes melting in Cheryl's dark hair. She tilted her face upward, inhaling deeply. Law wrapped his arm around her shoulders and whispered, "From now on, it's just you and me." Cheryl smiled. "That's enough." The wedding reception was held at Kappa Estate, a mansion on a vast hill overlooking the lake, where everything gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, silk tablecloths draped the tables, and white orchids and candles adorned every corner. The luxury was so perfect it felt cold. Cheryl felt like a stranger wandering through a world that wasn't hers. She moved among men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns, their polite chatter skimming past her like dust in the air. Law's hand never left her back, gentle but steady, as if he feared she might vanish. When dessert was served, Dawson rose with a glass of champagne. The room instantly fell silent. "Marriage," he began, his voice deep and commanding, "is the union of two families, two bloodlines, two traditions." The hall listened. Cheryl knew what was coming. Dawson went on, his eyes flicking toward her. "But some people mistake passion for legacy. They believe love can replace heritage. They forget that a family is built on generations, not fleeting emotions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cheryl felt heat rise in her face. She didn't cry, didn't bow her head. She looked straight at him, while Law's hand found hers under the table. "My son," Dawson said, turning to Law, "has chosen that path, a blind choice, a betrayal of his own bloodline." Some guests forced awkward smiles. Others blushed with discomfort. But no one dared to stop him. Then Law stood. His chair scraped the floor with a sharp, cutting sound. His voice was calm but firm. "Father, enough. Sit down, Law," Dawson snapped. "You're making a fool of yourself." "No," Law said, his tone now like steel. "You are." He pulled Cheryl to her feet. "This woman," he said, "is not a stain. She is the only miracle that's ever happened in my life." The room froze. Cheryl looked at him, his eyes burning like fire in the cold night. "You taught me that power means control," Law continued. "But she taught me that power means freedom. You taught me that love is a contract. She showed me it's a choice, and I chose her, always." The murmurs rose, then stopped. Dawson stood motionless. The hall held its breath. Law said softly to Cheryl, "Let's go home." They left hand in hand. Behind them came the chaos, voices arguing, chairs scraping, Dawson shouting. But Cheryl didn't look back. She walked steadily away from the place that once demanded her submission. Outside, the snow was heavier now. Law opened the car door and helped her in. Through the window, she watched the lights of the mansion blur and fade like an empire beginning to burn out. He took her hand and whispered, "We don't belong there." "No," she smiled. "We belong to each other." That night, they slept in a small rented room with only 2 plastic cups, a single candle, and the warmth of 2 clasped hands. Cheryl rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tomorrow will be hard," she murmured. "I know," he said, "but we'll still have each other tomorrow, and that's enough." Moonlight streamed through the window, casting its glow on their faces, 2 people who had given up the world to keep the one thing that truly mattered: love. 3 years after the wedding, Chicago was still as cold as the day they first met. But the chill didn't come from the wind inside Kappa Tower, a 37-story glass building reflecting the skyline. It came from the way people looked at each other. Cheryl stepped into the grand lobby in a grey business dress, hair neatly tied, eyes sharp and composed. She was no longer the trembling bride from years ago. Now, she was the head of strategy, the first woman of color to sit on the executive floor of Kappa Industries. Yet as she walked down the hallway, she could still feel the glances that followed her, curious, disdainful, or simply unable to believe she had lasted this long. On the 34th floor, the boardroom stretched like a courtroom. The glass doors opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Dawson Kappa sat at the head of the table, hands resting on a thick folder. He looked up, his grey eyes cutting through her like blades. "Good morning," Cheryl said calmly. "Sit down," Dawson replied, without looking. Law was there too, seated halfway down the table. His face was tense, jaw clenched. As Cheryl passed, he tilted his head slightly, a fleeting glance that said, "Stay calm. No matter what happens, I'm here." The meeting began. Numbers filled the screen, reports, charts, projections, all just a ceremony before the storm. When Cheryl finished her presentation, silence filled the room. She sat down, heart steady but uneasy. Something felt wrong. Dawson cleared his throat, then opened the folder before him. "Thank you, Miss Luckett," he said, voice like metal striking stone. "You've worked hard, but I believe it's time for a change." Cheryl looked up. "I don't understand." He slid a document toward her. "This is the board's official decision. effective immediately. The words on the page took her several seconds to process. Termination of employment, Cheryl Luckett. Reason, incompatible with Kappa Industries' cultural direction. The air turned solid. A few people cleared their throats. One lowered his gaze. Cheryl drew a deep breath. Incompatible? What does that mean? Dawson leaned back, a cold smile touching his lips. You thought you could change how this company works. But Kappa Industries doesn't exist to teach people compassion. We exist to make a profit. And I don't need an employee who brings her heart to the boardroom. A faint, cruel laughter rippled around the table. Cheryl glanced at her colleagues. Only one pair of eyes met hers. Kemp Reeves, the only one not looking away. You want me to leave right now? She asked. Yes. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. For a moment, time stopped. 5 minutes. The phrase echoed in her head like metal striking marble. She inhaled deeply. All eyes were on her, waiting to see how the woman of color would crumble. But Cheryl stood, folded the paper neatly, slipped it into her pocket, and met Dawson's gaze. Thank you, she said softly. Dawson frowned. Thank you? Thank you for setting me free. The room went silent. She walked out, the sound of her heels on marble steady and deliberate, each step marking the fall of pretense. As the doors closed behind her, a chair scraped loudly. I'm going with her, said Kemp Reeves, voice low but firm. Dawson's head snapped up. What did you say? I'm quitting. Right now. The room erupted in whispers. Then another stood. Then another, until 22 more followed. Each chair dragging back sounded like a drum of defiance. Cheryl turned from the door, eyes glistening but voice steady. Are you sure about this? She asked. Kemp nodded. No one should stay where they aren't respected. She smiled. Then let's go. They walked out together, 23 people leaving behind expensive suits and hollow smiles. In her office, pale afternoon light streamed through the glass wall. On the desk, only a few things remained. A wedding photo, a notebook, a small cactus, and a mug that read "Dream Bigger." As she packed the last item into the box, the phone rang. Cheryl. Law's voice was urgent. I just heard. Where are you? In my office, she said evenly. I'm packing. I'm coming down. 5 minutes later, he rushed in, still out of breath. Are you okay? He asked. She smiled. I am. He did this in front of everyone. God, Don't be angry. She cut him off gently. He only did what men like him know how to do: control. Law's eyes were red. I should have stopped him. You already did, she said. You loved me. She lifted the box and walked out with him. In the lobby, people stopped and stared. Some whispered. Some bowed their heads. No one spoke. Kemp waited near the door. Are you ready? For what? She asked. For the first day of freedom. She laughed, her first real laugh in hours. The first day, huh? Yeah. We'll need an office, a few desks, and a lot of coffee. Outside, the Chicago wind blew hard, snow glinting like silver confetti. Cheryl paused on the steps of Kappa Tower, clutching the box, and looked up at the steel letters spelling Kappa Industries. She whispered to herself, "Thank you for pushing me out." Law took her hand. She turned to him, her eyes no longer sad, only resolute. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But fear doesn't mean stop." They descended the steps and blended into the crowd. Behind them, the skyscraper loomed tall, but the name Kappa grew faint in the fading sunlight like an empire beginning to fade. They walked along the river, where seagulls circled over grey water. Cheryl stopped, catching her reflection in the glass of a distant building. "I had 5 minutes to clear my desk," she said, smiling softly, "but a lifetime to rebuild everything." Law looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "Then let's start," he said. She nodded. "From the beginning, where no one believes it's possible." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of snow and coffee from a small cafe across the street. They kept walking, leaving the cold tower behind, stepping into the journey that America would one day call the 5-minute revolution. When the old iron door creaked open, dust fell like snow. Cheryl stood on the steps, a cardboard box in her hands, looking down into the dim basement Kemp had found through a friend. There were no desks, no chairs, just hanging wires, damp walls, and the smell of rust. But in the weak glow of a yellow bulb, she saw one thing: a chance to begin again. Law followed behind her, coat slung over his shoulder, 2 bags of documents in hand. "This is our office?" Kemp laughed, clapping him on the back. For now, thick walls, cheap rent, and working outlets, the holy trinity of startups. The group burst into laughter, their voices echoing through the space as if to chase away fear. Their first day in the basement began with the scratch of pens and the smell of burnt coffee. Ramona Hill, a young former colleague of Cheryl's, was wrestling with an ancient coffee machine. "I swear this thing is older than me," Cheryl chuckled, "as long as it still gives us a few drops." On the wall, she drew a diagram with a marker, LKI, Luckett Kappa Innovations. The ink bled into the grey paint, but the letters shone like a promise in everyone's eyes. Sitting in a corner typing on an old computer, Kemp joked, "We're using tech from the Cold War." "Perfect," Derek Miles replied. "We're at war, too." That afternoon, snow fell outside the small window. Cheryl sat by a makeshift desk, 2 cardboard boxes stacked together, reviewing old files she'd brought from Kappa Tower. She took notes, divided tasks, and made every pen stroke steady. Around her, the others worked quietly. No one complained. No one questioned the future. They believed. As the sun set, faint light filtered through the basement window bars, brushing their faces. Cheryl looked up and saw Law taping a torn map, Kemp wiring new cables, and Derek fixing another bulb. In that moment, she saw them, the people who had left safety to follow a woman who'd just lost her job. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for believing in me, but for believing we could be better." Kemp grinned. "We believe you because you've never lied to us," Ramona added, eyes glimmering. "You didn't promise we'd be rich. You promised we'd be fair, and that's enough." They worked late into the night, the click of keyboards blending with the howl of wind outside. At 1 a.m., Law placed 2 cups of instant noodles on Cheryl's desk. "Eat," he said. "Did you eat yet?" "Waiting for you." She smiled, taking the wooden chopsticks. They sat side by side in the cold basement, eating noodles like a feast. The broth was saltier than usual, but the warmth spread through their hearts. After dinner, Law leaned back against the wall. "Tomorrow might be worse than today," he murmured. "Maybe," she said. "But at least tomorrow we'll know who we're waking up for." They all slept there on the floor. Cheryl lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, the patterns spreading like a web. In her drifting sleep, she saw a faint light, perhaps the first dawn of LKI. A week later, Chicago was hit by a record cold. The streets turned white, roofs buried under snow. The basement heater broke, and their breath burned in the frigid air. Kemp brought in a tiny electric heater, wires snaking across the floor. "We'll freeze before we go bankrupt," Derek joked. "No," Cheryl said, wrapping her scarf tighter. "We'll get warmer, as long as our ideas are big enough." She pinned a new sheet of paper on the wall. "Human first business model. Leadership through loyalty." "Sounds philosophical," Ramona frowned. "Exactly," Cheryl said. "Because the world's too pragmatic already. We don't need another company. We need a reminder." The days that followed blurred together. Cheryl called every old contact and sent countless emails. Many didn't reply. Some rejected her outright. Who is she again? The one Kappa fired? She heard that more times than she could count. Each time she hung up, she breathed and dialed another number. That night, she worked alone under the lamp. Law was out meeting partners. The others had gone home. She stared at the thick business plan and thought of those 5 minutes that had changed everything. Then she smiled. 5 minutes to lose it all, she whispered, but enough to start again. The door opened. Law stepped in, his coat dusted with snow. He set a warm coffee bag on the desk. "No contracts," he said, "but I brought faith." She laughed. "Better than contracts." They rearranged the desk together and hung another bulb. The basement grew a little brighter. Law sat beside her and held her hand. "You know," he said, "I was terrified the day you left Kappa Tower. But now, I'm just proud." She tilted her head. "Why?" Because I married someone who isn't afraid to start over. She rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, snow blanketed the world in white, but the light glowed warm and golden inside the basement. When the team arrived the next morning, Cheryl was up, mopping the floor. "We need a clean start," she smiled. Kemp asked, "What's the plan today?" "Find our first project," she said. "Even if it's small, as long as it's real." By afternoon, Ramona burst in, breathless. Someone agreed to meet. A small distributor in Evanston. Cheers erupted. Kemp high-fived Derek. Cheryl just smiled, eyes shining. That evening, before leaving, she pinned one more paper to the wall. From fear to loyalty. From loss to beginning. Law stood beside her, watching. "You know," he said quietly, "this basement will become legend one day." Cheryl turned to him with a smile. "If someone believes, I do." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then that's enough." Outside, snow still fell. But within the basement, something unseen had begun to grow. Not money, not power, but faith. The first headline broke on a foggy Monday morning, when Chicago was shrouded so thick in mist it seemed the city itself was burning. Cheryl was pouring coffee in the basement when Kemp, pale-faced, clutching his phone, burst in. "You need to see this." Cheryl took it. Scanning the screen, a bold headline screamed across one of the city's top business news sites. "Woman fired from Kappa Industries now runs a startup built on stolen ideas." Below it was her photo, a side shot, low lighting, framed to make her look cold and arrogant. Beside it, another picture, Law's. The caption read, "Only son of tycoon Dawson Kappa, now living with his wife in a dingy basement." Cheryl read it once, then again. Each sentence felt like a needle to the skin. The article implied she had manipulated Law through affection, that their new company was nothing but a personal vendetta in disguise. Kemp's voice was low, tight. "Someone clearly paid for this." "We both know who," Cheryl murmured. Law entered then, snow still clinging to his coat. He scanned the article, lips pressed hard, eyes burning with something between pain and fury. "My father," Cheryl nodded. "I think so." The storm didn't stop there. Within 3 days, every outlet picked it up. Each article added new poison claims that Cheryl had stolen Kappa Industries' data, that Law was being controlled by his wife, and that their startup was a fantasy. In the comments, thousands of strangers dissected them, some pitying, others mocking, most cruel. The basement team lived inside that whirlwind. Ramona slammed her phone on the table. "I can't take it anymore. They're calling us losers." Cheryl said nothing. She opened her laptop, read every word with steady eyes, then closed it. "No statement?" Kemp asked. "No, we don't wrestle in the mud." But that night, when everyone left, Cheryl stayed behind. The weak light fell across her face as she reopened the articles and reread them, every word, every comment. Then tears came, quiet and unguarded. When Law came home, he found her motionless. He knelt beside her, took her hands. "You don't have to read any more of it. I just want to understand," she whispered. "Why do people hate so easily?" "Not people," he said softly. "Just one man, and he's afraid of you." She looked up at him with a faint, sad smile. "You're standing between two sides." "I know, and I've already chosen." Law kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow, I'm going on TV." "No," Cheryl gasped. "They'll tear you apart." "Let them try," he said calmly. "I'll tell the truth." Friday morning, Chicago drowned in fog, but the city's TV studios blazed with light. Law Kappa, only son of transport magnate Dawson Kappa, appeared live on Business Morning Live. Down in the basement, the team huddled around an old laptop. The picture stuttered, but the sound was unmistakable. Ramona whispered, "He's actually doing it." Cheryl sat frozen, hands clasped tight. The host, sharp-voiced, predatory, began, "People say your wife controls you, that she made you betray your family, abandon your fortune, and build a company on stolen data. What do you say to that?" Law met the camera with calm, unwavering eyes. "I say this. People who lack courage will always attack what they don't understand. And my wife," he paused, took a breath, is the most intelligent, honest and courageous woman I've ever known. The host blinked, then pressed. But your father fired her for failing to meet Kappa standards. Law interrupted, his tone still measured. My father fired her because she refused to bow. In my family, loyalty means silence, but to us, loyalty means standing up when something's wrong. She did that. And I'm proud she did. The basement was utterly still. Cheryl could hear her own heartbeat. The host tried again. You've given up hundreds of millions of dollars. For what? Law smiled faintly. For the one thing money can't buy, the peace of looking in the mirror and not seeing a coward. Do you think your love was a mistake? No, Law said, eyes steady on the lens, and Cheryl felt as if he were looking straight at her. If loving her is wrong, I don't want to be right. If choosing conscience makes me weak, then I'll be weak forever. And if losing everything is the price of standing beside the one I believe in, I've paid it and have no regrets. The studio fell silent. The host had no question left. Law bowed his head slightly and said, "Thank you for letting me tell the truth." When the broadcast ended, the clip went viral. I love like Law trended across social media. Thousands wrote, "If that's a mistake, I want to love like that." When the screen went dark in the basement, Cheryl buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Moments later, Law burst through the door. He had come back faster than she thought possible. She couldn't speak, only held him tight. "You just declared war on the world," she whispered, voice breaking. "No," he murmured. "I just defended my world, you." They kissed in that basement, once dark and forgotten, now lit by love and defiance. Outside, snow drifted softly, catching the light through the small window like a million tiny pieces of hope falling from the sky. After Law's televised interview, the world seemed to shift overnight. In the basement, computer screens flickered non-stop with hundreds of new emails, not job offers or investment proposals, but simple messages that said, "I believe in you." A woman from Texas wrote, "I was fired once for telling the truth. Thank you for making me feel less alone." A student from Seattle said, "I'm studying economics. After watching your husband's interview, I finally understand business ethics." Cheryl read each one, eyes blurring. She couldn't tell if she was crying from joy or exhaustion. Law came over, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You've touched people's hearts." "I just told the truth," she whispered. "They're the ones who reminded me that someone's still listening." But emails didn't pay the basement rent or power bills. LKI was still nearly empty. Everyone worked tirelessly, but there were no real projects yet. One afternoon, Derek burst in, face pale. "Cheryl, my daughter's sick. The doctors say she needs surgery now." The room went silent. Derek, their lead engineer, slumped into a chair, covering his face. I don't have the money. My insurance ended when I left Kappa." No one spoke. Cheryl opened her drawer, pulled out an old checkbook, and wrote quickly. Derek looked up, stunned. "No, I can't take that." "You're not taking it," Cheryl said, pressing the check into his hand. "You're keeping it for now. We're a family. Families help each other." When Derek left, Kemp lingered by the door. "If he knew you just gave away almost everything you had left." Cheryl smiled faintly. "Money's just paper. Loyalty, that's the foundation." That night, they kept working. Ramona cooked soup in a small electric pot, the air filling with the scent of onions. Law repinned their project board. Kemp ran diagnostics, and Derek sent a message saying his daughter was in surgery. No one said a word, but something unspoken warmed the air, not false hope, but the quiet certainty that they were where they needed to be. The next morning, Cheryl arrived early with 2 bags of sandwiches. She placed one on each desk, then picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the wall, "We won't become great because of money, but because of how we treat each other." When the team came in, they stood silently for a long moment, reading the words. Ramona murmured, "We should print that on the logo." Cheryl smiled. "No, it should live in our hearts, not on our shirts." Day by day, they battled bills, and long nights past midnight. Yet no one complained. Once, Kemp asked, "How do you still smile through all this?" Cheryl answered, "Because I know every day we're building something money can't buy." 3 months later, The first real call came in the damp chill of early spring. A small logistics company in Indiana wanted to meet LKI to see if they were truly different. That morning, Cheryl wore a white shirt with a frayed collar, standing before the basement mirror, taking a deep breath. Laura buttoned the top for her. "You look perfect. We only get one shot at this," she said. "No," he smiled. "We get as many as we have each other." They drove an old car for 4 hours through pounding rain. The windshield fogged, but Cheryl kept smiling. "Rain's good luck," she said. "It washes the way clean." The presentation lasted 3 hours. Cheryl spoke with calm conviction, no sales pitch, just a story about loyalty, trust, and people. When she finished, silence filled the room. Then the company's director stood and extended his hand. "We'll sign with you. I don't know if you're a genius, but I know you're good." Cheryl shook his hand, tears streaming. Laura grinned. Kemp slammed the table. "God, we did it." Back in the basement, no one said a word at first that night. They gathered around the old table, cracked open cans of soda instead of wine, and raised them under the soft yellow light. "For who?" Kemp asked. Cheryl answered, "For everyone ever told they weren't enough." They drank. Derek played a scratchy jazz tune through a tiny speaker. Laughter mixed with the clinking of cans. Cheryl stood, turning to Laura. "Will you give me the first dance of our new empire?" "With honor," he said, smiling. They danced in the empty room, light bouncing off the walls, their shadows flickering like twin flames. "Do you believe it?" Laura whispered. "Believe what?" "That everything changes from here." Cheryl leaned into him. "If our hearts stay true, everything else will find its way." Outside, the Chicago rain had stopped. The sky cleared deep and bright, as if the city itself had been washed of its old wounds. And in that small basement, the people once called failures danced in the soft glow of new beginnings. Because they finally understood the foundation of an empire isn't steel or glass, but loyalty and faith. In the morning in Chicago, the river shimmered under sunlight, and Kappa Tower stood tall, proud against the sky. But its gleam now felt like ice on the surface of a frozen lake, beautiful only from above, while deep beneath, the currents had begun to stir. The first sign reached Cheryl on what seemed an ordinary morning. Kemp entered the basement office, holding the city's most prominent financial newspaper. "You should see this," he said, voice heavy. The bold headline took up half the page. "Kappa Industries faces collapse. Stock plummets. Investors pull out." The room went silent. Cheryl stared at the page for a long while before setting it down. Laura came in, his coat still damp with morning mist. He read it, stood still for several seconds, then murmured, "My father is afraid." No one replied. They all knew this wasn't karma or revenge. It was the inevitable result of years spent building an empire on fear and pride. From that day, the balance shifted. LKI, the small basement-born company, began appearing in discussions about human-centered leadership. Businesses sought Cheryl out, not to ask who she was, but to learn how she made people believe in each other again. Meanwhile, at Kappa Tower, chaos ruled. Firings, lawsuits, internal disputes each day brought a new headline. The once proud faces from glittering banquets now walked out quietly, heads bowed. Financial reports nosedived. The board fractured. An empire once deemed unbreakable was rotting from within. One night, Dawson sat alone in his vast office. The golden light reflected off the untouched glass of whiskey on his desk. Hollis entered, her face pale and drawn. "You should talk to your son," she said softly, "to let him teach me how to be a father." "No," Hollis whispered, voice breaking, "to remember that you once were one." Dawson didn't answer. He turned to the window, where across the skyline, the lights of LKI Innovations glowed bright against the dark. Cheryl, the woman he'd once called unworthy, had become the one the entire industry now listened to. He gripped his glass tighter, a faint, bitter smile flickering on his lips. "Maybe real power," he muttered, "was never control. It was trust, something I never learned to keep." In the small basement office on the south side, Cheryl worked late as always. When she heard the news of Kappa's fall, she didn't smile. "Someone else's fall doesn't make us rise," she told Kemp. "We can't become what we once despised." Law watched her quietly, his gaze filled with love, pride, and something like sorrow. He knew she had truly won, not through victory, but humanity. For days, rain swept through Chicago. Then one gray afternoon, the basement door opened, and Hollis Capper, the woman who'd once stayed silent when her son was cast out, stood there. She no longer looked like a symbol of wealth or grace. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "Cheryl," she said, her voice fragile, "I came to ask for your help." The room fell still. Cheryl gestured for the others to leave. Soon, only two women remained, one who had been humiliated and one who had chosen silence. "What kind of help, Mrs. Capper?" "Dawson. He's losing everything. Investors, partners, friends, they've all turned away. He won't say it, but I know he's breaking. Can you help save the company?" Cheryl studied her quietly. "Save the company or save him?" Hollis lowered her head. "Both. He was wrong, Cheryl. He destroyed everything out of pride. But he's my husband. I can't just watch him fall." Cheryl folded her arms, her voice low but steady. "Do you remember the day I was thrown out of that boardroom? You could have said just one sentence, 'Dawson, stop,' but you didn't. You stood still." Hollis trembled. "I know. I was a coward." "No," Cheryl said gently. "You just chose fear over courage. And that choice, it's what fed the monster in him." Hollis broke into tears. "I just don't want him to die alone." Cheryl sighed, her tone softening. "No one is alone if they've ever known love. And if they haven't, no one else can save them." Hollis turned to leave, but Cheryl called after her. "Tell him this: if he truly wants to change one day, I'll listen. But not through money, power, or the Capper name, only through truth." The door closed, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and silence. Law entered, draping a coat over his wife's shoulders. "My mother came?" "Yes," she begged. "And you said no?" "I said we reap what we sow." Law held her close, whispering, "I never thought I'd live to love both my father and you and still hurt this much." Cheryl rested her head on his chest. "Hurt means we're still human. Maybe they just forgot what that feels like." Outside, the rain slowed. The city reflected in the puddles like a mirror. High above, in the top floor of Capper Tower, Dawson sat alone, staring at the warm, steady light of LKI glowing across the skyline. He whispered, "Maybe she's my true legacy, not because she won, but because she never forgot how to be human." And below, in the small office that once was a basement, Cheryl closed her laptop and turned off the lights. Before leaving, she wrote in her notebook, "An empire is only as strong as its heart still knows how to feel. They lost theirs. We still have ours." She took Law's hand as they stepped out into the quiet morning. Above them, dawn was breaking, the first light piercing through the clouds, shining straight onto the small building that read LKI Innovations, where those once discarded by the world were rebuilding it, piece by piece, with the simplest thing of all, faith. 3 years after leaving Capper Tower, Cheryl Luckett appeared everywhere on Forbes covers, business headlines, and leadership podcasts. But what made her an icon wasn't revenue or technology, it was her philosophy. People are not tools to achieve success. They are success. LKI had moved from the basement into a 3-story glass building in downtown Chicago. Its windows glowed every night, not with the cold gleam of Capper Tower, but with a warm, honey-colored light. Above the entrance, a simple phrase was engraved, "Welcome home, not to work." Inside, Cheryl walked among laughter, the hum of keyboards, the smell of coffee, and faint jazz in the background. From the dark basement of the past, she now led over 500 people, most of them individuals once rejected by other, harsher systems. Yet behind her calm smile, Cheryl carried a quiet ache, a wound, long healed, but still tender when touched. That ache was Dawson Capper. The man had disappeared from public view more than a year ago. Rumors said he had sold most of his shares and lived reclusively on the city's outskirts. Others claimed he was gravely ill. No one knew for sure. Then one May morning, when tulips bloomed along Michigan Avenue, Cheryl received an invitation from the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. The letter read, "We invite you to speak on the theme Loyalty and Humanity in Business. This year's topic, the future of power." She stared at the words for a long time, a strange feeling stirring. 3 years ago, she had been expelled from a boardroom for being unfit for Kappa culture. Now, the world was asking her to speak about the future of power. "Will you go?" Law asked, seeing the letter in her hands. "I have to," Cheryl said softly. "Not for them, for everyone who was once told they weren't enough." Law smiled, eyes full of pride. "Then I'm going with you." 2 weeks later, they landed in Zurich. Morning mist hung over Lake Lehman, still and silver like glass. The conference center gleamed with light, flags of every nation fluttering in the wind. Wrapped in a long coat, Cheryl walked through a sea of journalists. Flashbulbs burst around her. Voices called her name in several languages. "Miss Luckett, how does it feel to be invited to speak? Do you believe your philosophy of loyalty over fear can change the world?" Cheryl smiled gently. "I'm not here to change the world. I'm just choosing not to fear it." That day, more than 5,000 people filled the auditorium. CEOs, politicians, scholars, reporters, all under the glow of countless white lights. The host announced, "Please welcome Cheryl Luckett, founder and CEO of LKI Innovations, the global face of human-centered leadership in the 21st century." Applause rippled through the hall like a wave. Cheryl stepped onto the stage in a simple cream dress. No extravagant jewelry, only a faded silver wedding ring. The spotlight touched her face, not glamour, but with the quiet radiance of someone who had walked through darkness and stayed kind. She paused, took a slow breath, and began. 3 years ago, I was fired from a major corporation. The reason? I asked a question no one wanted to ask. That question was, if power costs us trust, what is it truly worth? The hall went utterly silent. She continued, "Today, I'm not here to teach. I'm here to tell you this. When everything is taken from you, your title, money, reputation, the only thing that helps you stand again isn't ambition. It's the loyalty of those who believe in you. Loyalty can't be bought. It grows from fairness, listening, and how we treat one another when no one is watching." A swell of applause filled the hall. Cheryl looked out across the audience. "Power without humanity is just fear," she said softly. "But power with humanity, that is freedom." The lights reflected in her eyes, blue and deep as the lake outside. People would later say that when she spoke, many CEOs stood to applaud, and a few quietly bowed their heads. Because in her words, they recognized themselves and what they had lost. That night, after the forum, Cheryl stood on her hotel balcony. The air was crisp, the wind from the lake carrying the scent of the last snow. Law draped his coat around her shoulders. "You were extraordinary." She smiled, leaning into him. "It feels strange, like I closed an old door, but don't know who's standing on the other side." Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I'm in Zurich. I'd like to see you. Dawson Kappa." Cheryl stood still for a long time. Her heartbeat quickened. Law looked at her and understood instantly. "Where is he?" "I don't know," she whispered. "He just said, here." The next morning, mist still veiled the lake. Cheryl walked along the quiet shore. A few birds circled above, their wings cutting through the fog. A tall, silver-haired man in a dark coat sat on a bench near the water, holding a small notebook. When Cheryl approached, he looked up. Dawson Kappa, older, thinner. His eyes were calm, stripped of command, no longer a symbol of power, only a father who had lost his way. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice hoarse. "How are you?" A faint smile. "I've been better, but for the first time in my life, I feel light." They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by water and mist. Dawson spoke slowly. "I watched your speech. You said something I never understood my whole life." "What was that?" "That power isn't to be feared, it's to be trusted. I built everything on fear, and in the end, fear took everything." She looked at him. In his eyes flickered a fragile light, the last flame of someone finally facing himself. "I didn't come to blame you," she said gently. "I came because I believe everyone deserves one last chance." He nodded, gaze drifting toward the lake. "You remind me of myself when I was young, except you love people more than I ever could." "I'm sorry, Cheryl, not for firing you, but for making my son spend years learning how to forgive his father. Tears welled in Cheryl's eyes. Law doesn't hate you, she said softly. He just grieves that you never realized how great you could have been if only you'd known humility. Dawson smiled, a genuine smile, faint as breath. He pulled an old photo from his pocket. Law as a boy, standing between his parents by Lake Michigan. Back then, he murmured, I thought success meant building something that could never fall. Success is raising a son who can love someone deeply enough never to fall. Cheryl rested her hand on his shoulder. You still have time to live like the man you could have been. As she rose to leave, Dawson called out, Thank you for not becoming me. She turned back, smiling. You taught me something you never meant to, that fear holds nothing. Her silhouette grew smaller along the lakeside path as sunlight began to break through the fog. Dawson sat motionless, wind brushing through his silver hair, the water sparkling with shards of light. He closed the notebook in his hands. Inside, one rough line was written, Power means nothing without grace. That night, at the hotel, Cheryl looked at Law sleeping peacefully. She whispered, We've come so far, haven't we? From a dark basement to the light of the world. Law stirred, smiling. And where did that light begin? She leaned closer. From the loyalty of 22 people in an old basement, and from the belief that love could still change the world. Outside, Zurich lay quiet under the stars. The lake reflected the city's lights like a trail of galaxies. Cheryl gazed at the sky and smiled softly. She knew she was no longer the woman once thrown out of Kappa Tower. Now, she was the woman standing on the world stage, and still, her heart was exactly where it belonged. 3 months after the World Economic Forum, autumn swept across Chicago in soft winds and gold leaves blanketing Michigan Avenue. LKI was thriving beyond all forecasts. Its workforce had doubled, global corporations were seeking partnerships, and the press had given Cheryl a new title, the heart of business. Each day, she walked through bright hallways filled with laughter, purpose, and faces. She trusted those who had chosen to follow her from the beginning. But the larger things grew, the heavier they became. One late evening, when the office was quiet, Cheryl sat alone by the window. The streetlights cast soft lines across her desk, piles of unsigned papers, meeting schedules, invitations, contracts. In one corner lay a plain envelope, no return address, only 2 handwritten words she recognized. For Cheryl, she opened it. Inside was a short letter, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. I don't have much time left. I've sold Kappa Industries, cleared the debts, and donated the rest to charity. But there's one thing I can't leave without giving back the truth. There are things I hid, and you deserve to know them. Come to the house by Lake Michigan, where it all began. Dawson Kappa. Cheryl sat motionless for a long while. Law entered and saw the letter in her hands. It's from him, isn't it? Yes, she whispered. He wants to meet, at the old house. Law's eyes filled with concern. Are you sure you want to go? There are things, she said quietly, you can't rest from unless you hear them with your own ears. The next morning, Cheryl drove out of Chicago. The road wound through forests of red and amber leaves. Sunlight streamed through branches like ribbons of gold. When she arrived, the lakeside mansion appeared aged, moss-covered, but still carrying its old dignity. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside. The air smelled of wood and medicine. A family portrait on the wall still hung. Dawson, Hollis, and a young Law, smiling in a world long gone. A rasping cough broke the silence. Dawson sat in an armchair by the window, frail, his skin drawn, eyes tired but clear. Thank you for coming, he said, voice trembling. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Cheryl replied softly, setting down her bag. He nodded, then pulled a bundle of yellowed papers from the drawer with shaking hands. This, he said, is the original proposal for the LKI project back when it was still under Kappa Industries. Did you know? Cheryl frowned. I thought LKI was something I built after I was fired. Not entirely, he said quietly. You began it, but I stole it. The room froze. Cheryl said nothing. Dawson's breath came shallow. When you worked at Kappa, you submitted a proposal, the loyalty management model. I rejected it publicly, then secretly gave it to another team. When it failed, I blamed you. I used fear to erase your work because I was terrified. Terrified that a woman of color could outshine the name Kappa. Tears welled in Cheryl's eyes. He went on, voice breaking, "You defeated me not with brilliance, though you had that, but with humanity, something I never possessed. I'm leaving you the original file. It's always been yours." His trembling hands offered her the folder. Cheryl took it, tears falling onto the faded paper. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not for this, but for finally telling the truth." Dawson nodded weakly, a weary smile on his lips. "Will you forgive me?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't because you deserve it. It's because I deserve peace." Outside, wind swept in from the lake, carrying golden leaves across the porch. As Cheryl turned to go, Dawson's fading voice followed her. "Thank you for teaching me that dignity is stronger than power." She didn't look back. The cold air hit her face, but her heart felt strangely light. She knew those words weren't just the ending of one man's story, they were the beginning of a different kind of world. That evening, Cheryl returned to Chicago. The city glittered, but inside she felt a calm she hadn't known in years, as if, after 3 long years of running, she had finally arrived. Law was waiting at home. He held her close. "How is he?" "Weak," she said softly, "but at peace." "And you?" "I am too." They sat by the window, the lights of the river shimmering below. Cheryl told him everything: the stolen proposal, the years Dawson had hidden behind his fear of being outdone. Law listened in silence, then said quietly, "Now I understand why he was always cold. No one ever taught him that love doesn't make you weak." "At least," Cheryl said gently, "he learned that before it was too late." The next morning, Cheryl brought the old folder to LKI headquarters. Standing before all her employees, she told the story plainly, without embellishment. "The man who was once our greatest enemy," she said, "taught me the most important lesson, that the past, no matter how wrong, can become a foundation if we dare to face it." The room was silent. Kemp rose, voice trembling. "So, what will you do with it?" Cheryl smiled. "We'll make it public, not to accuse, but to remind the world that truth doesn't die when buried. It only waits to be unearthed by kindness." Applause filled the hall, not the loud, celebratory kind, but the deep, steady rhythm of shared understanding. That night, after everyone had gone, Cheryl stayed behind. She turned on the lamp, looking around the wide glass office, her reflection calm, weary, but bright. On her desk lay the old proposal beside the newest one from LKI. A yellowed page next to a white one, past and present, no longer at odds, but connected. She whispered to herself, "The past isn't something to forget, it's what lights the way forward." Law entered, draping a sweater over her shoulders. "You're still working late?" "No," she smiled, "just thinking." "About what?" "About how, maybe, we're writing the final chapter of this story." Law smiled, kissed her forehead. "If it's the final chapter, I hope it ends in peace." She shook her head softly. "No, love. It will end in life because we built something we can never lose from everything we lost." Outside, the wind rustled through the autumn trees, carrying the scent of ripe fall. The moonlight spread across the river like a vast mirror, reflecting 2 figures side by side, building a legacy of their own. A world where loyalty isn't a promise, but a way of living. In the warmth of that room, Cheryl whispered, as if to the woman she once was, "I've come back to where it all began, and in the end, I've won, not because I was stronger, but because I never stopped loving." 3 weeks after the meeting by Lake Michigan, Chicago slipped quietly into its rainy season. Early winter rain fell in soft, steady sheets, as if the city was washing away the dust of long years. From the top floor of LKI headquarters, Cheryl sat by the glass wall, watching streaks of rain trail down the pane. She remembered another morning long ago, standing inside Kappa Tower, rain outside, and only 5 minutes to leave her life behind. Now, somehow, everything had come full circle. The phone rang. A trembling voice, Hollis Kappa. "Cheryl, it's me. Dawson doesn't have much time." There was no hesitation. "I'll come," Cheryl said. That afternoon, she and Law drove through the rain toward the care facility outside the city where Dawson was staying. The road shimmered with reflections of passing lights. Neither spoke. Their hands stayed clasped. Law's voice broke the quiet. "I don't know whether to feel sad or relieved." "Both," Cheryl said softly. "Sad because part of you is closing, relieved because that part finally gets to rest." The room was small, filled with the scent of antiseptic and dried chrysanthemums. Dawson lay motionless, his skin pale, his breath shallow through the oxygen tube. His eyes were open, fixed on the window where rain slid down the glass. Hollis sat beside him, holding his hand, tears falling soundlessly. When they entered, she stood and wept. "Thank you both for coming." Law moved to the bedside, his voice breaking. "Father." Dawson's eyes shifted toward him, weak, but still bright. "My son, and her." The words dissolved into a prolonged cough. Cheryl stepped closer, touching his shoulder. "We're here," she whispered. For a while, there was only the steady beeping of the monitor and the hush of rain outside. Then Dawson spoke again, each word slow, broken by breath. "I once thought, to keep power, I had to make others fear me. But the truth is, I was only afraid of myself." Law bent down, tears falling onto his father's hand. "You don't need to talk now." "I do," Dawson said, forcing air into his lungs. "I lived my life to be feared. Now I only want to be forgiven." Cheryl's voice was quiet, steady. "You already are, Dawson. Not today, but from when you told the truth by the lake. Forgiveness isn't for those who deserve it. It's for those brave enough to face themselves." Tears rolled down his sunken cheeks. "Thank you," he rasped. "Thank you for not letting me die. I'm still a monster." He motioned for Law to come closer, clasping his son's hand tightly. "You've done what I never dared. You've loved without calculation. Hold on to her. Don't let the world turn you into me." Law couldn't speak. He only nodded, tears streaming freely. Dawson's breathing grew ragged. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling. "Listen," he whispered. I left a fund in your mother's name, and hers, not to make amends, but so others can have the chance she once didn't." He turned to Cheryl, a faint, exhausted smile on his lips. "Now I know why you won. Because you never wanted to win, only to do what was right. There are no winners, Dawson," she said, her voice as soft as the rain. "There are only those who finally learn how to love." The monitor slowed. Thunder rumbled far away, but the rain kept its steady rhythm. Hollis wept into her hands. Law clutched his father's arm. Cheryl stood close, resting her palm on Law's shoulder, eyes glistening. Dawson's lips moved one last time, barely a whisper. "Now, I'm free." The green line on the monitor flattened. A long tone filled the room. Then silence. Law buried his face in his father's hand, his sobs muffled. Cheryl held him close, her own tears falling quietly. No one spoke. Only the rain outside continued falling, breaking, disappearing like the last drops of a passing storm. Dawson Kappa's funeral was simple. No cameras, no convoys of luxury cars, no hollow speeches, just family, a few former employees, and several people Cheryl had once helped rebuild from the ashes of Kappa Industries. That morning, the sky cleared the first blue after days of rain. Cheryl stood beside Law, fingers intertwined. She spoke briefly, not a eulogy, but a message. People think forgiveness means forgetting, but no forgiveness is remembering, without pain. An empire fell today, but a new seed has taken root in its ashes, and that seed is called grace. Law bowed his head. "I think he's listening." "I think so," Cheryl replied. "Maybe he's finally where he was meant to be all along, in peace." When everyone left, she lingered by the grave. On the stone, Hollis had chosen the inscription, Dawson Kappa, 1949-2025. He learned too late, but he learned. Cheryl placed a single white chrysanthemum on the grave, then turned away. As she walked through the quiet cemetery, the wind carried the scent of damp earth. She reached for Law's hand, and they silently walked down the cobblestone path. That afternoon, they returned to LKI. The office was full of sunlight. Kemp met them at the door. "Everyone sends their condolences," he said softly. Cheryl nodded and went upstairs. On the top floor, she unveiled a new bronze plaque on the main wall, engraved with Dawson's words from the lake. Power means nothing without grace. Beneath it, she added, for everyone who was ever underestimated, let your kindness be your answer. The office fell silent. Then applause began, not loud, but deep, full of understanding. Everyone knew. An era had ended. That evening, Cheryl and Law went home early. Outside, a drizzle returned quiet, gentle, touching only the lavender blossoms by their porch. They sat together under a blanket, listening to the soft rhythm of rain. Law asked, "How do you feel now?" "Light," she whispered. As if these 3 years were a long dream full of tears, but ending in sunrise. He smiled, eyes warm. "I've learned something." "What's that?" "That true love isn't about never hurting. It's about still choosing each other, even when it hurts." Cheryl rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed. Outside, the rain slowed, then stopped. A pale light appeared through thinning clouds, the first moon after the long storm. In the stillness, she murmured, "So this is the end, isn't it?" Law smiled. "No. It's the beginning of living as people who've learned to forgive." Cheryl looked out the window, watching the last droplet slide down the glass. She touched Law's hand, her voice soft as wind. "And there it is, the final raindrop. After this, only sunlight." 3 years after Dawson Kappa's passing, a new tower rose in the heart of Chicago. It wasn't like any other skyscraper, not cloaked in cold, black glass that mirrored power, but built from panels of warm, golden glass that caught the first light of day. At night, a straightforward line glowed from its peak. Horizon Tower, where kindness builds empires. People in Chicago called it the building that smiles. When sunlight spilled through its amber windows every morning, the tower shimmered gently, reflecting onto the river like a face smiling back at the city. Inside, on the top floor, was the new home of LKI, now one of the world's leading human-centered consultancies, operating in more than 40 countries. On the main wall hung a large photograph. 23 people in a dim basement years ago. Beneath it, a line was engraved. "We began underground to reach the sky." It was opening day for Horizon Tower. Cheryl wore a deep blue dress, her hair swept back, her calm eyes carrying the quiet light of someone who had crossed every storm. Beside her stood Law, grey suit, soft smile, a few silver strands in his hair. When they stepped to the podium, the crowd rose to their feet. Journalists filled the aisles. Cameras focused on the woman once deemed unfit for Kappa culture, now one of the most respected voices in global business. Cheryl gazed across the room, then turned toward the sunlight pouring through the glass behind her. Her voice was low, steady. 10 years ago, I was asked to leave a tower because I asked the wrong question. Today, we stand in a new one where every question is welcome, and people are heard before they are judged. Applause swept through the room, but she raised a hand. "We didn't build Horizon Tower to prove we are better than anyone. We built it to remind the world that dignity is the greatest asset any empire can have, and that no success is worth it if it makes someone feel small." A deep, reverent silence spread across the hall. Morning light framed her silhouette in a soft halo. She turned to Law, smiling. "You once said we only needed a home made of love. Now we have a tower made of kindness." Law stepped forward, taking her hand. "No," he said softly. "You are that home, Cheryl." Laughter rippled through the hall, followed by applause. When it quieted, Cheryl lifted her gaze, eyes glimmering. "Today, I don't want to remember what we lost. I want to thank what we found: faith, loyalty, and love." Her voice caught for a moment. "And if anyone asks the greatest gift I ever received from the man who tried to destroy me, I'll say it was the chance to learn forgiveness." In the audience, Hollis Kappa, her hair now pure white, wiped her tears. She looked at Cheryl with the love and admiration she hadn't dared to show. When the ceremony ended, the crowd dispersed. Cheryl lingered, alone. She stepped out onto the highest balcony, wind lifting the edge of her dress, sunlight spilling over the glass. Below her, the city stretched wide and alive. She closed her eyes, the hum of traffic, laughter, and wind blending into the quiet music of life. Law came beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The city. It's breathing peaceful, like us." Cheryl smiled, leaning into him. In the end, everything makes sense, doesn't it? He nodded. Even pain. Because pain teaches us how to love better. That evening, Horizon Tower glowed with golden light. On the roof, a small garden of lavender, the same flowers Cheryl once kept in that basement, now bloomed as LKI's living symbol. The soft fragrance drifted into the air. Laura and Cheryl sat on a stone bench, watching the city shimmer below. In the distance, Lake Michigan glinted like a mirror, reflecting moonlight and 1,000 city lights. "Do you ever wonder," Laura asked, "what would have happened if you'd given up the day my father fired you?" She smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "I'd probably still be working somewhere, earning a good living, but I wouldn't have found myself. Being thrown out was the cruelest thing they did, and the greatest gift they gave." Laura chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Only you could speak of pain as if it were grace." Cheryl tilted her head toward him, her eyes soft. "Because it was grace. Without the dark, we'd never know how bright we could shine." A light wind moved through the lavender. Stars began to bloom across the sky. Cheryl rose, walking to the railing, looking at the vast city below. Inside her grew a quiet, expansive peace, the kind that comes when you finally know the world is big enough for everyone once cast aside. "Laura," she whispered, "do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The sound of continuity." Down below, the 22 original members of LKI, those who had followed her out of Kappa Industries, were gathered, laughing, taking pictures. Now they were directors, consultants, and founders of new branches. Yet when they saw her, they still called her Captain. Cheryl watched them, eyes glistening. "It began with 22 people," she said. "Now there are thousands, but numbers don't matter. Spirit does." Law slipped his arm around her and kissed her hair. "I think you just wrote the first line for the next generation." Cheryl smiled. "No, they'll write it themselves. I want to live quietly, love you, and grow more lavender." They turned toward the horizon together. The sun was rising slow and golden, painting the sky honey bright. Its light caught the face of Horizon Tower, making it glow like a beacon guiding the city. "Do you remember?" Cheryl whispered. "You once said that every day we choose each other is a victory." "I remember." "Well," she said softly, "this morning, as the sun rises, I choose you again." Laura smiled, squeezing her hand. "And I, as always, choose you before the dawn." They kissed under the newborn light. Below them, the wind brushed against the glass, carrying the scent of lavender and the rising sun's warmth. Sunlight streamed into every corner of the city, through every window of Horizon Tower, illuminating the photograph of 23 weary, radiant faces from long ago. Beneath it, the small inscription glimmered in gold. "Love built this." And so, from a single thank you whispered on the day she was cast out, from a kiss in an empty room, from nights of instant noodles and cold basement floors, an empire of kindness was born. Cheryl Luckett and Laura Kappa, two people once exiled from power, had proven that the greatest strength of all is not in control, but in love. Their story spread across the world, not as a legend of revenge, but as a quiet truth about life, that real love never loses.